Hello world, it's me, Lyndon Tibbetts, IFT founder and CEO, and welcome to what I think is going to be a really exciting presentation today on succeeding in the work from home economy, where we'll look at some integration strategies from a number of leading companies that are really helping make work from home so much easier on everybody out there. We've got an action-packed agenda today. We'll start with a quick introduction, talk a little bit about the transition from regular office work to working from home. We'll have some integration-led digital transformation slides, and then we'll jump right into the 4 strategies being deployed by Slack, Microsoft Office 365, GitHub, Dropbox. And finally, we'll end with audience Q&A. So, work from home. My guess is almost everybody out there tuning in is very likely tuning in from their new home office. Here are some amazing photos of IFT team members in their home offices. We have a Slack channel on which everybody posted their updated home office setup, and it's just a totally different world. This is a far cry from your typical cubicle or open office plan. So there's so many different things changing, and it's pretty easy to capture in just a couple pictures just how dramatically different it is for everybody to be working from home. So quick numbers. A recent survey from Forbes said that 77% of the people surveyed feel that they are now working different hours at home. And that's 42% of the overall US labor force is now working from home, which is just staggering to think about. 66% of those said that they are more likely to work nights and weekends. Over half, 54%, reported more distractions. For anybody out there like me with kids, you know what I'm talking about. Shoot, I've got cats too. If I only had cats, it would still be more distractions. And 33%, or roughly a third, reported working more than in the office when they're working from home. So not just has the location changed, the amount of time and the amount of distractions that people are grappling with has dramatically changed as well. And work from home is really here to stay. It's just so hard to imagine things going back to normal as we knew them 6 months ago. NPR, has some articles around permanent work from home is coming. We've seen announcements from some really big companies like Facebook and Twitter, Square, Salesforce, in which they expect to stay in some work from home, either fully or some kind of tandem home and office setup, even after the virus goes away. And over 67% of workers expect that work from home policies will become permanent. And that really hits close to home because even here at IFT, we're now 100% remote. So even though we're relatively smaller than some of these other large organizations, we're also making some pretty dramatic changes going into the future. And work from home is just really a catalyst for what was already happening in a big way across so many industries, and that's digital transformation. There's this sudden shift now has really just accelerated many of the trends. We've talked in prior sessions about some of that acceleration as it applies to digital subscriptions and e-commerce, but there's so many other things that are also seeing a lift in both engagement and usage because of this new setup. And again, is one of the things that we've seen here at IFT as well. Many of our end user KPIs, number of users signing in, number of users creating new applets on our platform, are up 20 to 30% since work from home started in earnest. And the overall size of software as a service, which is the market category that has seen so much of this traction because of work from home and the new way of working, is just only getting bigger and bigger. It's projected to be over 300 billion market size by 2026. And there has been no shortage of IT companies actually doubling down on investing during this period. So a survey, again by Forbes, found that 54% of IT decision makers were actually increasing investment in things like collaboration applications, despite decreased overall budgets. So, to talk a little bit more about digital transformation, I want to make sure we're crystal clear that the real way you should be thinking about digital transformation has very little to do with whether or not you have an app or a website. Sure, those are maybe specific pieces of evidence that you're working in a digital company. But what digital transformation is really about is a transformation in your ability to have a relationship with your end user or customer. And because of digital tools and things like apps and websites, that relationship now has almost unbounded potential to grow and evolve over time relative to how you used to communicate and relate to those same customers. And integrations are a big part of that. Integrations and not product features, we believe, are the quickest and most efficient way to increase and deepen that user engagement and that relationship you have with your end users. Connecting to other frequently used apps and devices really centers your product in your users' lives. It makes your product an important aspect of everything else those users and customers are already doing, rather than some kind of satellite or lonely island out disconnected from everything else those users are doing. And finally, you've got to pick the right strategy for you to leverage integrations to meet those specific goals. Again, we find that productivity companies especially are doubling down on integrations. Browse to any productivity company's homepage, and I can almost guarantee you that somewhere in the value props or the way that they position themselves is built around how many other products and services they integrate with. It's now just expected. It's the new norm. Integrations are a requirement for just about anything you're building. Productivity companies especially, but just about anything else as well. And when you think about how those companies are positioning themselves, I like to think that if you think of the top 3 value props that companies tout for why their product is better than others, in the top 3, it's not just one of the value props, it's in that top 3 value props, you'll find integrations in different types of apps or platform specific ecosystems that are being built around these individual tools and services. So when you choose an integration strategy, you've really got 3 different things to think about. You can pick doing direct integrations, having your team build one-off integrations one by one, and you get the benefit of having the exact perfect user experience. But those trade-offs then come in the form of being very costly and time-consuming to build one by one. You can build and host your own developer platform, and this creates defensibility. It creates something that's really hard for other companies, especially smaller companies, to replicate if you do it well. But it's also exceedingly difficult to build and scale. And also, even as you reach scale, to curate, to find the one good thing for every 10 bad things or 10 things that may not work or may not actually meet your end user's expectations. This is something only the most prominent and important companies in the world can pull off well. And finally, your third option is to partner with and work with an integration platform as a service, like IFT, that's already at scale and can offer a much greater speed and flexibility in terms of your capabilities to build out and offer those integrations to your end users. Now, most companies that we work with actually choose a mixture of all 3 or 2 out of 3 of these approaches. And we think that makes the most sense. If there's an iPaaS, and we wouldn't claim to be the end-all be-all solution for integrations, there's always going to be one-off integrations that might be strategically important or might fall outside the scope of what's currently available on the IFT platform. And so it's great to have different options and different approaches depending on how you think about the importance or the strategic value of that integration. That said, you now can't just get away with having the 3 or 4 most important integrations. You've got to have tens and in many cases hundreds. And as we get into looking at what some of these other leading companies are doing, you'll find that the number of integrations that they currently support is really staggering. So you've got to think about platforms and iPasses as well. Another thing to note is that end user clients, your iOS app, your Android app, if you have a desktop, Mac, or Windows app, and even voice, Alexa, Google Assistant, those are just integrations as well. Now, those are integrations with a whole lot of UI or pixels and buttons. But again, if you think about those as integrations, and in most cases, extremely strategic integrations, you can begin to see how important integrations and that long tail of other things that your customers expect your brand to work with really come into play. A quick note on voice. We believe voice continues to be, again, not the end-all be-all replacement as a new way to interact with your customers or a new interaction surface area, but just another to add on to mobile and desktop and web as well. And so what we found too is that now over 72% of consumers that have a voice assistant actually use that every day. And when you begin to think about one of the things that's changing when all of your users are now working from home, they now have the option to be using voice. They're probably sitting in the same room with or even right next to their voice assistant at home. And an interaction that really sounded ludicrous for everybody to be in the office talking to Alexa or Google Assistant while they're also working next to coworkers now starts to make a little bit more sense when they're isolated at home with a voice assistant and with a mode of interacting that they use for so many other things. So let's jump into those 4 unique integration strategies for Slack, Microsoft Office 365, Dropbox, and GitHub. We'll kick things off with Slack. So launched in 2013 with an amazing story as they shifted from being a multiplayer game into a collaboration and communication platform. Their most recent offering aims to completely eliminate email. They've got 12 million daily users and over 100,000 paying customers. Their integration strategy really took shape within a couple years of their launch. They were able to get out there and get tremendous traction and attention, and they were able to be successful, one of those few brands that is successful with their own platform and developer API in a way that so many other brands and businesses is really envious of. They launched a workflow builder, so their own way to make some connections within the enterprise, kind of like IFT in 2019. And they're, of course, focused on things like remote work and team communication, whether they're in the office or not. They've got a great client integration strategy and amazing clients, whether it's their browser or their Mac or their Windows app or their iOS and Android apps. So they've treated these like so many other companies do as strategic first-party integrations, things that they're going to build in the best possible way, in a very custom way, because it's so much of what Slack means to their end users. On IFT, they actually have a very minimal set of things you can do. You can only do one thing, and that's an action to post to a specific Slack channel. They have things like triggers and queries still coming soon, but even with that one action, it's such a powerful action that it leads to what we see as millions of different integrations that users have enabled over time. The way those integrations break down is also very interesting in that almost a third, 31% of those integrations fall into that long tail, things that are likely not directly integrated with the Slack platform. The second largest bucket is social networks. As we've done research, what those people are doing are largely folks on the marketing team or the communications team that are monitoring mentions of their brand across services like Twitter or Facebook or Pinterest. And things like email and news information also fall into that same bucket. So what are consumers doing with Slack on IFT today? Well, they're doing things like logging a missed call to their Slack channel. You can imagine as your employees are working from home and your customers are working from home, that blurring of your personal world and your work world is getting harder and harder to really kind of distinguish from. In fact, you can't even say they're blurring. They're really now one and the same. They're doing things like using Google Calendar and getting different reminders about their first meeting or their next meeting. They're integrating with Google as a way to really send quick notes to themselves in Slack so they can remind themselves to take care of something later on that day. And we're also starting to see a number of folks beginning to integrate the connected devices that they have at home, things like their Ring doorbell, to their Slack. If they're glued all day to their screen using Slack, collaborating with coworkers, and their doorbell rings, which mine actually just did about 10, 15 minutes ago, then getting that update in Slack, maybe you're further away from the ringer or something like that, or you're maybe plugged in and you can't hear the doorbell, begins to make a lot of sense. So Office 365, moving on to the next service. They're, of course, subscription-based, released way back in 2011 as 365, and they've got a staggering 155 million monthly users. They've got an integration strategy that I think is very uniquely Microsoft. Microsoft has taken a very neutral stance, especially relative to folks like Apple or Google, and maybe even Amazon. You know, Microsoft is looking to work with everyone, despite the fact that they kind of also are competing with everyone. So I think that's very unique. They hit over 75 million daily users in April 2020, and they launched a preview of Teams for consumers in June. So they're starting to think about how do they take some of these recent products that they've launched, like Teams, and actually make them more accessible and more usable by just general consumers. And you can kind of see, you know, reading between the lines, that Microsoft is really well positioned for this blurring of the lines between work and home, because they've got a brand and products that have spoken to and been used by people at work since the beginning of Microsoft history, and also in consumers, in users as well. And so that's a great position for them to be in. They, of course, have a client integration strategy that looks a lot like Slack and some of the other brands here. They've got a browser, Mac, and Windows app. As I said before, that they're really looking to be everywhere and work with everyone. And I think that is something that makes them specifically unique relative to the other tech titans out there. And what can consumers do with Office 365 and IFT? Well, because Office 365 has, I believe, 5 or 6 different services on the IFT platform, depending on whether you count OneDrive as Office 365 or not, they've got a huge list of triggers, actions, and queries, really full APIs plugged into the IFT platform for Office 365. And as you break that down across some of the different services, if you look at what people are doing with Office 365 Mail, also, you know, previously known as Outlook, there's a whole lot of notifications. So people want to get notified, especially about high value or urgent emails in other places. What people are doing with Office 365 Calendar, what's really interesting is that almost 60%, almost 2/3 of what people are doing are actually syncing across other calendars. So they're connecting their Office calendar to other calendars like Google Calendar or Apple Calendar. And that, I think, is a perfect example of this blurring of the lines between work and home. And quickly at OneDrive and 365 Contacts, OneDrive as a cloud storage service, they've got this very unique and diverse set of use cases, from photo and video to social networks. You can see that's very kind of evenly distributed across some of those really big categories, with that big other bucket only being about 11 or 12%. And 365 Contacts is almost the exact opposite. Almost 80% of what people are doing there are syncing between other contact services. So very similar to what people were doing with 365 Calendar, is they're taking other ways in which they store contacts and looking to sync those, you know, in many cases, probably personal contact lists with some of their work-related contact lists. And so what do consumers do with 365 and IFT? Well, they do things like automatically silence their phone during scheduled events, connecting to Google to send quick emails. Again, another way to get a reminder. You know, using Slack to send themselves a reminder before different events in their calendar. So there's a lot of companies out there that are all in on 365, but they also went all in on Slack. So they're not using Teams yet, and they need to have those tools working together. And then again, some of the neat use cases is that line continues to blur between work and home, where people are blinking their lights, Hue or LifeX, when a high priority email arrives from a specific person or with specific keywords. Next, we move on to GitHub. So founded in 2007, acquired by Microsoft in 2018, not yet part of the 365 suite of tools, but I'm sure that could be coming at some point. They've got over 50 million users. Their integration strategy, they, like Slack, were able to build an incredible footprint in the market and were able to be successful with a developer platform and API in a way that many brands aren't able to achieve. They've got 250 apps that they integrate with and over 4,300 actions, specific things that GitHub can do when specific events or things happen within GitHub. And they have a very similar client integration strategy. The client integration piece here across almost all four of these companies is almost exactly the same. Browser, Mac, Windows app, iOS, and Android. Again, they're treating those as first party, the best possible experience that their team at GitHub can build. They have a very robust set of triggers, actions, and queries on IFT, and their users are connecting GitHub to many different things on the IFT platform. So again, this is another example where almost a third, about 28% of the types of things that people connect GitHub to via IFT fall into an other bucket, where there's just the wide world of things that they connect to. The next biggest bucket is just things like notifications. My guess is a lot of those are going to places like Slack or email, and then give people an option to tailor notifications for specific things that they're really interested in. And what are consumers doing specifically with GitHub and IFT? Just like I said, receiving an email for certain types of issues that are closed in a repository, pulling different tasks and issues from GitHub into Trello, tracking some of the pull requests into Google Spreadsheet to kind of graph or map over time, and then doing things like connecting GitHub to Amazon Alexa, creating a new issue in GitHub via Amazon Alexa, which I think is a really cool way to use Alexa. And finally, we'll talk about Dropbox. Founded in 2007 as Evenflow, and I didn't even know that ahead of preparing for this session. Launched as Dropbox in 2009, and they've got 600 million users, so just a massive, massive user base across 180 countries. And they've got an integration strategy very much like GitHub and Slack, where they've been able to build their own developer platform, hundreds of integrations and extensions that they offer. These all create additional value for their end users. And you can imagine that for each of these integrations that saves more data in Dropbox, they create a whole lot of value for Dropbox as a business, because their business is directly mapped to how much people are storing in Dropbox. And it increases and automates those data uploads just to the point I was making, and it broadens out the ways in which people can use what on the surface is a very utilitarian service, saving files in the cloud. Their integration strategy, again, is very much like GitHub, Slack, and Microsoft. They want to be everywhere. They do have things like an Apple Watch app, and some additional apps like Smart Sync and Password Manager that kind of expand beyond that utilitarian cloud storage service that they offer. They've also got a robust set of triggers, actions, and queries on the IFT platform. And the biggest use case, about a third of what people are doing with Dropbox, is social network based. And again, as we've dug in here and asked a lot of questions of our users, why they're using things like Pinterest or Twitter or Facebook with Dropbox, so many of them are people that work on a marketing team or part of a communications team at some other business, looking to save and archive all the different types of assets that are being posted about or by their brand. So what are consumers doing with Dropbox and IFT? Again, they're integrating things like Google Assistant to create a new text file in Dropbox to back up notes and things like that. They're sharing files in Slack from a Dropbox folder. I think this is really unique because Dropbox, I believe, has a really nice Slack integration, but it's still maybe not specific enough or customizable enough. They're doing things like saving Google Docs to Dropbox, despite the fact that Dropbox has some competitive offerings to Google Docs. There are people out there that are mixing and matching the types of tools they use, and that's a trend that I think will just continue on into the future. Or they're getting notifications when new files are added. Say they're working with a external consultant on a design project. They want to know when they're uploading new work to a specific folder. And we've looked at these 4 strategies and we kind of put them all together here. And there actually are a lot of similarities here, even though these businesses are very different. They all have open APIs. They all support, hundreds of direct integrations, and direct integrations are basically integrations that they've either built themselves or other developers have built for their platform or for that open API. None of these brands actually yet support Amazon Alexa or Google Assistant directly. They do through IFTTT, but they don't do it directly. And I think that's something that could change. We talked a little bit about that blurring of the lines and how it affects some of the ways in which people might be looking to use their voice assistant as part of their work life as well. And via IFTTT, they all have over 500, in some cases 600 integrations that IFTTT brings to the table. And they offer those integrations, the integration user experience via web and mobile primarily. And they have a very different mix of categories, different types of things that they're integrating with on the IFTTT platform. And so to wrap things up, you've really got kind of 2 different ways to think about integrations, and really you could broaden this out to apply to almost any strategic product decision that you have. You can try to do it all, or you can focus on what you do best. And we believe that you shouldn't be trying to do it all. You should pick the one thing that you do incredibly well, and then find ways to work with or integrate with others to handle the rest. And that's exactly what your end users are doing too. We talked about a number of examples in which users, despite having very easily accessible offerings, from Microsoft, they're choosing things like Slack to go along with the tools they already use from Microsoft. Or despite having some really amazing products offered by Dropbox for collaboration on documents, they're using Dropbox in tandem with things like Google Docs. And that's just something you have to expect your users are trying to do as well. So we believe you should build better integrations, not more product features. In fact, integrations are really just like product features in that if they're done well, then they're going to increase that relationship and the engagement that you have with your end users and your customers. And so you can get started with it today. Again, we're an integration platform as a service, so we're one of the, I think, richest and most robust options when you think about your integration strategy. And you can do that starting with a team plan that starts at a very low price, on an annual basis, and then grows as your users grow. Or if you want to do a much larger upfront deal, we offer custom pricing and some other enterprise features for some of the larger businesses out there as well. If you're a developer and you just want to start building, that's easy. We've got a developer plan. You don't have to talk to anybody on the sales team. Just get started right away. Just go to IFTTT.com, look for the developer plan, and just get going. So that's all we've got today, talking about working from home and some of those big changes and how you might think about integrations and changing some of your product strategy along with this much broader macro change. Would love to take a couple questions from the audience today. So the chat should be open now. Just go ahead and post in some of those questions, and I'll pick a couple and we'll go from there. Cool. Looks like the first one that'll be fun to answer here is someone's asking, what types of work from home integrations am I personally using? So one of the things that I've been tinkering with lately, so you might have heard me talk about an integration that I have between my litter robot, which is an automated cat litter box cleaner. It's fantastic. If you haven't heard of one, or if you have cats at home, you should definitely check it out. But I have that connected to my iRobot Roomba. And so it cleans up just that specific area around the cat litter box whenever the cat goes to the bathroom. And that's been really fun. However, what I found lately, because all of this is happening just one room away from where my home office is, I've actually found it a little bit distracting. You can imagine if we were in the middle of this session here and you could hear the Roomba going next door. It could be a real disaster. So what I've actually done is I've started to tinker with some of the new features that we're building here at IFT that allow me to connect other services into that same integration. Things like Google Calendar specifically. So actually right now I'm checking my calendar before we run the Roomba. And if I'm in the middle of some session that has other people involved in it, something on my calendar with other people other than just me, then I don't actually run, I wait to run that later. So that's, I think, one that's top of mind and one that I'm kind of slowly evolving because of my work from home situation. There's another question, a pretty broad one, but I think it's really interesting. What other changes in user behavior have we seen due to work from home? Yeah, so I think one way to look at it, again, I go back to this idea that digital transformation is really a transformation in the relationship that you can have with your end user because of what digital services now bring to bear. And so with that, thinking about what are your users doing differently? And in fact, what we found really valuable is just reaching out to them and talking one-on-one. Sure, you can do surveys, sure, you can look at industry research, but I think, reaching out to some of your users, and you really can't overvalue having something like a end user or customer board or a group of people. We have a group of kind of early beta testers that we can always reach out to and just talk one-on-one about what's changed for them. And some of the things we found that have been changing are actually some of the exact things that we're changing here at IFT. People are saying that they're starting to reduce the time spent in meetings quite a bit. There's a lot less meeting because you're not able to meet in person. And that seems like a really good thing. In fact, here at IFT, we've even done a no meeting Thursdays. So the rule is you can't have any meetings on Thursday. And for the most part, people largely stick to it. But also because of that, so much more is happening in digital tools, whether that's Slack or email or Google Docs. People are doing a lot more writing and a lot more reading because of it. And I think that's an interesting shift that we've experienced, and another one that I think may or may not have some types of consequences for your product and integration strategy over time. Well, all right. That's all we have time for. Thanks for tuning in. Really excited you were able to join us today and hope to see you again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.